Hi everybody, this is the pre-reading video for the story Gorilla My Love. The questions for that will be due on April 21st at 7 p.m. So I want you to watch this video before you actually go ahead and try and finish reading the story. And just a note that the reading for the 21st is in two sections. There are pages 152 to 161 that simply just tells you about character, what character is, and so you'll read that. And then the story Gorilla My Love is in the other document, that's pages 162 to 167. So, this story is rather confusing to start off with. If you're just coming to it cold, you might not be able to figure out what's going on. So I want to read the first paragraph, and then I'm going to go through and point out some things to you that'll help you understand what's happening with it. So, the name of the author, Tony Cade Bambara, and the story is Gorilla My Love. That was the year Hunka Bubba changed his name. Not a change up, but a change back, since Jefferson Winston Vale was the name in the first place, which was news to me because he'd been my Hunka Bubba my whole lifetime, since I couldn't manage Uncle to save my life. So far as I was concerned, it was a change completely to something sounding very geographical weather-like to me, like something you'd find in an almanac, or something you'd run across when you sitting in the navigator's seat with a wet thumb on the map crinkly in your lap, watching the roads and signs, so when Granddaddy Vale say which way, Scout, you got sense enough to take the next exit, or take a left, or whatever it is. Not that Scout's my name, just the name Granddaddy call whoever's sitting in the navigator's seat, which is usually me because I don't feature sitting in the back with the pecans. Now you figure pecans all right to be sitting with. If you think so, that's your business. But they dusty sometime and make you cough. And they got a way of sliding around and dipping down sudden like maybe a rat in the buckets. So if you scary like me, you sleep with the lights on and blame it on baby Jason. And, so as not to waste good electric, you study the maps. And that's how come I'm in the navigator seat most times and get to be called Scout. So that's all potentially rather confusing. There's a lot of stuff going in there, but I want to talk you through some of the things that are happening in this. So it's called Gorilla My Love, which is a rather strange thing. Gorilla My Love, that doesn't seem like, things don't seem like they go together. That first paragraph doesn't really give us a good sense of any indication about what the title is about, but just file the title away, just like we did with the other stories. You file the title away, and just kind of, as you read later on in the story, see how this idea of Gorilla My Love might come up, because it does begin to make some sense later on. So let's look at the first sentence. That was the year Hunka Bubba changed his name. And we're like, whoa, wait a minute. Hunka Bubba? Who is Hunka? That doesn't sound like a name, Hunka Bubba. That's rather strange that somebody's named Hunka Bubba. Where does that come from? And again, as I've said before, the authors are not out to confuse us. In this case, a lot of what's happening in this story is we're learning about the character. We're learning about the narrator, kind of who she is. And she's going to be speaking in a way that's kind of natural to her. And because she's speaking that way that's kind of natural to her, she's not necessarily always thinking about what might make sense to us. The author is going to make sure that we're going to figure things out if we are patient and sit with it for a while. But sometimes we're going to get thrown information at the beginning that doesn't quite make sense to us, but later on it will all make sense. A lot of times you simply have to be patient, file a sentence away, say, wait a minute, I don't understand this sentence, but I'll understand it later. So that was the year Hunka Bubba changed his name. So I don't know why somebody would be named Hunka Bubba. What a strange thing. But let me just keep that in the back of my mind as I go to the next sentence. Not a change up, but a change back, since Jefferson Winston Vale was his name in the first place. All right, so it's not a complete change to something completely different, but a change back, because his original name was Jefferson Winston Vale. That sounds like a real person's name, I guess. why did he change his name back to Jefferson Winston Vale from Hunka Bubba, right? Next sentence, maybe that'll clear some of it up for us. Which was news to me, 'cause he'd been my Hunka Bubba my whole lifetime, since I couldn't manage uncle to save my life. Now that's starting to provide some information that's going to help us out here. He was my Hunka Bubba since I couldn't manage uncle to save my life. Many of us have probably had a situation in our lives when we were younger, or at least we may have had younger siblings or something like that, where somebody's not able to pronounce something when they're younger, right? My sister could not say the name of our dog. Our dog was named Louie. My sister could not say Louie, so our dog was called Weedy instead. And so here this kid couldn't manage uncle, couldn't manage to say uncle to save her life. So she called her uncle Hunka Bubba. Right now this begins to make some sense. We have a kid who calls her uncle Hunka Bubba because when she was young she couldn't say uncle. Okay, so Hunka Bubba changed his name and went back to his actual name, right? Jefferson Winston Vale, right? So now that begins to make some sense. Which was news to me because he'd been my Hunka Bubba my whole lifetime. And notice it's my Hunka Bubba, right? That lets us know that it is her uncle. My Hunka Bubba my whole lifetime since I couldn't manage uncle to save my life. So as far as I was concerned, it was a change completely to something sounding very geographical weather-like to me, like something you'd find in an almanac. And so that name, Jefferson Winston Vale, that we have here, she says sounds very geographical weather-like. And I think what she's kind of referring to is different words that are related to weather. A gale is a very strong wind. A weather vane is one of those things that you've ever seen, you might have seen like in cartoons or something like that, that's on top of a house or on top of a barn, that spins around to tell you which direction the wind is going in. So that's a weather vane. And you could see how Winston Vale sounds both like weather vane and like a gale. And so she might be saying, look, here are this is what these names kind of sound like. And one of the things to keep in mind is if this is a fairly young narrator, we can understand how that makes some sense, that she's confusing those things. So far as I was concerned, it was a change completely to something sounding very geographical, weather-like to me, like something you'd find in an almanac. An almanac is a book that has a lot of information. Farmers would used to use almanacs back before we had the internet. It was a book that had all kinds of information about weather and when the moon and the tides and all kinds of things like that that people might need to know. And so she says this is something you might find in an almanac. And then she says, or something you'd run across when you sitting in the navigator's seat with a wet thumb on the map crinkly in your lap, watching the roads and signs, so when Granddaddy Vale say which way scout, you got sense enough to say take the next exit or take a left or whatever it is. So she says this name, Jefferson Winston Vale, sounds like something you'd run across when you're sitting in the navigator's seat, which is like the front seat of the car, right? And again, she just uses that language and she wants us to kind of follow along with that. That's what she calls it, the navigator's seat, the front seat of the car with the thumb on a map. Again, back before people had, we had Google Maps on our phones, you'd had to have a paper map. And so that paper map would sit in your lap, and that's how you'd have to figure out where you were going. And it took some skill to do that. Google Maps is pretty easy, or what it weighs or whatever you use, it'll just tell you where to go. But when you look at a map, you actually have to pay attention. You have to figure it out. And so there's a girl who can look at that map, and as it says, she has sense enough to say take the next exit or take a left or whatever it is. So she's good at reading the maps. And then she says, not that Scout's my name. Granddaddy Vale, her grandfather, notice the same last name, Granddaddy Vale versus her uncle, Jefferson Winston Vale. They're all in the same family. Granddaddy Vale says, which way, Scout? And then she says later on, not that Scout's my name. right? A scout is somebody who goes looking for things, right? You go scout out something, you know, like out in the woods, a scout in the woods. But she says, not that Scout's my name, right? That's not her actual name. Just the name Granddaddy call whoever's sitting in the navigator's seat, which is usually me because I don't feature sitting in the back with the pecans. Pecans are nuts, right? Now you figure pecans all right to be sitting with. If you think so, that's your business. But they dusty sometimes and make you cough, right? And this may not just be a little bag of pecans. We're going to find out later on that they actually haul pecans, bunches of them in the car, right? Whole baskets or buckets full of pecans, right? They pick them off the trees and then they haul them. And then she says, now you feature pecans all right to be sitting with. If you think so, that's your business. But they dusty sometimes and make you cough. And they got a way of sliding around and dipping down sudden like maybe a rat in the buckets. So if you scary like me, if you're afraid like me, notice that she's a child, and so she's going to use this kind of language, say if you scary like me, when she means if you're scared or afraid like me. You sleep with the lights on and blame it on baby Jason. That is probably her brother who sleeps in the same room with her, and says, oh, he's afraid of the dark, right? That's why I'm keeping the lights on. And so not to waste good electric, don't waste that electricity, you study the maps. And that's how come I'm in the navigator seat most time and get to be called Scout. So we're understanding some things about this character. It is going to be a child, right? Which I think is going to be rather important here. And that's one of the reasons why the language isn't as clear as it might otherwise be, because we're talking to a kid, and kids aren't necessarily as clear as they as adults. And so the author is going to be an adult, but she wants to make this sound like an actual kid. So it's going to be a little confusing in some ways. But again, if we stick with it, the author is going to make sure that we get the information that we need. Again, we're going to need to work a little bit, but we are going to make sure that she is going to make sure that we understand generally what's going to be going on. So again, just keep in mind that this is a child who's going to be telling this. Her uncle, Hunka Bubba, has changed his name. We want to know why. We don't know why he's changed his name. We haven't gotten that yet, but that's okay. We'll just file that away in our minds, hold on to that, and then later on, all that information will come clear. And so one of the most important things about reading a story is being okay with the things that you aren't clear about yet. To just be able to say, I don't know what this means, but that's okay. That's I'll figure it out later. And don't forget that thing, right? Because don't just say, well, I'll just ignore that. Hold on to it. Make a note of it on the side of the page. Do something like that so that later on, when it comes up again, you're like, oh, that's how it all makes some sense. So there's how to think about what we can get in the first paragraph.